أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. If we may begin by reciting one Surah Al-Fatiha on behalf of all our marhumin and marhumat. Rahimallahu man qara'a Surah Al-Mubarakah Al-Fatiha tasbikahu bis-salati ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. الحمد لله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. آمين رب العالمين. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. أحبائي، أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصيبة استشهاد مولانا إمام محمد بن علي الباقر علم النبيين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. We extend our condolences to the master of our time, Imam Sahib al-Amr, and to all the mu'mineen and mu'minat on this grievous occasion of the martyrdom anniversary of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. You notice that the time that marked the period of the imamate of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was one in which the essence of Islam in its entirety had disappeared. Yani, one of the divine functions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was to revive the essence of Islam within a Muslim ummah that had regressed to an extent of kufr and beyond in a period of only 60 to 70 years upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah, to the time that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam undertook the responsibilities of divine imamah. And you notice that upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah and the subsequent oppression of Ahlul Bayt, the persecution of Ahlul Bayt, shedding the blood of Ahlul Bayt, the direct impact which resulted in the regression of the Muslim Ummah is that not only were the Muslims in particular, but humanity at large were mahroom and were denied the opportunity of benefiting from the divine words and of wisdom and guidance that emanates from the Ma'soom Imam. The moment the leaders of Saqifah, who put into motion and set the foundation for Bani Umayyah to come forward and to oppress Ahlul Bayt in a manner that no other nation has oppressed other people and persecuted and shed blood of any one of their prophets or any other people. Bani Umayyah was only able to do this because the prerequisites and the foundation was set by the people of Saqifah. For when Ahlul Bayt was oppressed and Ahlul Bayt was persecuted, what was there remaining from Islam? What was there remaining from the Quran? What was remaining there from Tawheed other than letters on words? In fact, by the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, the Quran, which is the divine book of revelation, the divine book of guidance, the Quran in itself became a book of misguidance. Entum shufu ahibai. From all the madahib, all the different sects that exist within the umbrella of Islam, who claim to be within the umbrella of Islam, distorted theories of Tawheed that establish, wala'ayadu billah, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a body. We have sects within the Muslim Ummah that believe, no, Allah also has a body. This theory that Allah has a body, the justification was by using the Quran. The Quran, which is a book of guidance, became a book of misguidance. You should not be surprised that the divine book, the Quran, becomes a book of misguidance when its interpretation is manipulated or interpretation is at the hands of those who are ignorant. You look at the Muslim sects that believe in the lack of justice in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You refer back to a number of the sects that exist over there. Adala of Allah Azza wa Jal is not from the fundamentals of Islam. And the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal can be an oppressor, they use verses of this within the Quran. The Quran became a guide, instead of being a book of guidance, turned into a book of misguidance because of this jahl, this ignorance, and this manipulation. And to have a look, do not be surprised. You look, even in our day and age, a person can ask, how is it that the Quran can become a book of misguidance when it was revealed by Allah Azza wa Jal? And to look, in this day and age, within our lifetimes, you find that even when terrorist organizations that were shedding blood inside of Iraq and were recruiting these so-called terrorists under the name of Islam and jihadis, the likes of Daesh and ISIS and so on so forth, this person who performs and goes and commits this act of violence or participates as a suicide bomber, do they not use the verses of the Quran as a justification for shedding blood of the so-called kuffar? The Quran, which is a book of guidance, became a book of misguidance when it is interpreted by jahl or when its interpretation is manipulated. Forced state control over the masses to force them into submission to political authority. Quran has also been used. You have a look at the Muslim countries, which, or so-called Muslim countries that rule today under the name of executing people for spreading corruption on earth and going against the morals and the teachings of the Quran. Now have a look at these countries in which they have morality police, where citizens who may not be at the same level of iman, at the same level of taqwa, at the same level of practicing their deen, are publicly humiliated, and the Quran is used as a justification for their torture and their imprisonment and so on and so forth. The Quran, which is supposed to be a book of guidance, becomes a book of misguidance, becomes a book that leads to chaos, because the interpretation and the people who have positioned themselves to be the interpreters of the Quran are far and wide apart from the reality. And you find that even when it came to Karbala, when it came to say the Shahadah alayhi salam, on the day of Ashura, the amount of people who were recruited inside the army of Yazid la'natullahi alayhi, how many of them who stood up to fight against Sayyid al-Shuhada were Qaris of the Quran? Ya akhi, Qari of the Quran is not only somebody who had recited the Quran in a beautiful way. People who had memorized the Quran were the first in line to shed the blood of the grandson of Rasulullah. Those who had memorized letters of the Quran Summit stood up to shed the blood of the Quran al-Natiq. وَهَذَا أَحِبَّائِ, this is a reality. reality in which we live till today, and the dark reality within the history of Islam. And we are not from those who conceal history for any reason. We are followers of the truth. And this is a reality through which Islam lived, and a reality which we ourselves live today. فَطَبْعًا, you find that there were people under the guise of religion, where religion had become a tool, and the Quran is a book of guidance in itself, was restricted to mere letters on papers that people recited, but had no idea of the words and the reality of the words that they would recite within the Quran in itself. It became sheep who were followers of this religion but had no idea what the essence of this religion was, starting from the Quran and Tawheed in itself. And you find that as Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Ruhi lahul fida, began to undertake the responsibilities of Imamah, one of the central functions of the Imamat of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was to establish the true principles of tafsir of the Quran. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam played a fundamental role in ensuring that people understood the meanings that were represented within words inside of the Quran, the true implications of the verses, the real tafsir of the Quran from those who are selected by Allah, authorized by Allah to interpret the Quran. Ahibai, interpreting the Quran is not a task that anyone who says, because Allah gave me the faculty of intellect, I interpret the Quran as I want. Tab'an, there is tadabbur in the Quran. Tab'an, there is tafakkur in the Quran. And there is darajat of tafasir. But the reality, the haqa'iq of the Quran in itself is interpretation at a zahiri level and at a batini level. And for every batin, there is another batin. This ilm is with the a'imma of Ahlul Bayt. And you find that these are one of the first or one of the most important tasks, and every task from the Imam, by the way, is important. But you find in one which there was tarkiz, is that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam in his lifetime came forward with tafasir of the Quran that brought back the perspective of Tawheed and put into perspective the true teachings behind the revelation of the Quran. Which is why, Shabab, and I say this to myself before I say this to you, the importance of understanding the tafsir of the Quran through the riwayat and the hadith of Ahlul Bayt. Tafsir of the Quran by hadith. See, you and I can attempt to understand the divine words revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either through the faculty of our own intellect or depend on the interpretation of other infallible people. And there are principles of tafasir that are set in place in order for us to understand the Quran correctly, and all of it in its own place. However, there is one source of understanding the Quran, which is the purest form and the purest stream of knowledge, and that is through hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. May Allah have mercy on the soul of Allama Faqih Sheikh Fayd al-Kashani, the author of the Tafsir al-Safi. And you will find similar to this, you have Tafsir al-Burhan of Sayyid Hashim al-Bahrani, where these are tafasir of the Quran, where verse by verse of the Quran, or for a majority of the verses of the Quran, you find that the Mufassir of this Quran and the author of the Tafsir, the likes of Sheikh Fayd al-Kashani and the Sheikhs of Sheikh Hashim al-Bahrani in Tafsir al-Burhan, they come forward with the interpretation of the verse through the words of Ahlul Bayt, understanding the Quran through Ahlul Bayt. And this is where us as Shia, we need to up our games. And Tab'an, I say this to myself before I say this to any one of the brothers and the sisters. Recitation of the Quran as the Quran in the Arabic language is of utmost importance. with its makhraj, with its makharij, with its tartil, is absolutely important, and it has its own benefit, and it has its own barakah, and it has its own wisdom in its own place. But in addition to this, not only is it expected that as followers and lovers of Ahlul Bayt, that we will also understand the translation or the meanings of the words we recite. This is one thing. But in addition to this, the interpretation of these verses as per the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. And then you have implementation of these verses in our daily lives. For ahead of us, the responsibility is great. And it takes a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to realize the importance of this responsibility, to realize our obligations towards Allah and towards Ahlul Bayt as we live our daily lives. فالكلام أحبائي, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam comes forth and brings life to this lifeless ummah by bringing forward the true meanings of Tawheed and the true tafsir of the Quran in a world that had no idea. And we take by way of example incident which is mentioned inside of Kitab al-Tawheed. Kitab al-Tawheed of Sheikh Saduq. Hadith al-Sharif is narrated by Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, and it is apparent from here that Imam al-Sadiq was a witness to this hadith that emanates from his father Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. For Imam al-Sadiq being under the wings of his father Imam al-Baqir, that in itself has a great interpretation of how the establishment of the revolution that was started, knowledge-based revolution that was started by Imam al-Baqir, how Imam al-Sadiq went forward to magnify that. Hadith al-Sharif says, قَدَّمَ وَفْدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ فَلَسْطِينَ عَلَى الْبَاقِرِ, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. There was a delegation from amongst the dwellers of Palestine, and you know this entire region of Palestine, the occupied Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, this formed the greater area known as Sham, traditionally during the rule of up till the time of Bani Umayyah, la'natullahi alayhim. You find that the area of Sham referred to this geographical region, and Dimishq, which is Damascus, was the capital of this vast region. A group of companions or a delegation from this area came forward to Imam al-Baqir, فَسَأَلُوهُ عَنْ مَسَائِلٍ, and they asked him a number of questions in regards to deen or in regards to fiqh. فَأَجَابَهُم, and the Imam replied to them. ثُمَّ سَأَلُوهُ عَنِ الصَّمَدِ, they asked him about the meaning of the word as-samad from Surah Al-Ikhlas. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. What does the word as-samad mean in Surah Al-Ikhlas? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ. طيب. Over here, أحبائي, بين القوسين, between brackets, real quick note, the importance of Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas, yani the entire summary of Tawheed, the basis upon which you say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, is captured in Surah Al-Tawheed. Surah Al-Tawheed, also known as Surah Al-Ikhlas. Ikhlas, yani, one meaning of Ikhlas, sincerity. So the sincerity in Tawheed, yani, with all your sincerity, all your fiber and your being, you attest to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Surah Al-Tawheed The recitation of one surah to Tawheed, the thawab is equivalent to reciting 1/3 of the Quran, which is why the hadith says the one who recites Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times, he gets the thawab of the completion of entire Quran, an entire Khatmul Quran, which is why you find it has been tradition from our elders and from our ulama that even when they would go to a graveyard, on behalf of all the marhumin and marhumat, one of the first things they would do is recite Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times with the intention of the thawab of a Khatmul Quran for those who have passed away. This Khatmul Quran person sometimes thinks on behalf of my marhumin, how long will it take for me to gift them a Khatmul Quran? Okay, and to recite the Quran in its entirety takes effort and takes discipline, and one should do it regardless. But Allah Azza wa Jal has opened the doors of mercy. 3 times Surah Al-Ikhlas. If a person can even grant his marhumin and marhumat 50, 60, 100 Khatmul Qurans in a day if they like, through recitation of Surah Al-Ikhlas in batches of 3. Surah Al-Ikhlas, ya ahibba'i, we have hadith from Ahlul Bayt that emanate to the extent that the salat in which, or a salat in which Surah Al-Ikhlas is not recited, is a salat that has the least value, if any value, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ajib. Paraphrasing a number of the hadith that are to this effect. The importance of reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas in the surah, because it is this ultimate attestation in Tawheed. Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is us as the Shia, we are adamant in reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas as the second surah after Surah Al-Hamd in the second rak'ah of every salat. Why? This is a sunnah, again, Bain al-Qawsayn, for you to know, a sunnah that was established, or a sunnah that we came to know about by Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam during the time of Siffin, where those who recited Salatul Jama'ah behind the Amirul Mu'mineen would notice that Amir alayhi salam would recite the Surah Al-Ikhlas in the second rak'ah after Surah Al-Hamd, and hence it's become from the dayd and the practices of the Shia to follow in the footsteps of their master. In any case, you understand, or we begin to understand the importance of Surah Al-Ikhlas for you and I, ahibba'i, in every salat, inshallah, that we recite. Surah Al-Ikhlas is part and parcel within the second rak'ah. Tayyib, this Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is a central part within our salat, and 1/3 of it, and recitation of Surah Al-Ikhlas is equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. What do you and I, what do we know about the tafsir of this Surah Al-Ikhlas? Every day in our salat, when we say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad. What does Qul huwallahu ahad mean? Why is it ahad and not wahid? Why does the verse start with a command phrase that says Qul, say? Why doesn't it say i'lam or ifham Allahu samad? The emphasis on Qul. This, ahibba'i, everything that we recite in salat, this is a secret for increasing our attention in salat and increase for the spirituality within our salat, for the salat to have an impact on our daily lives. Kalima kalima, word by word, whatever you utter in your salat, take time to understand what it means and what it represents. Your takbiratul ihram, starting from that Allahu Akbar, why do you raise your hands up to the point of your ears? Ask yourself, find out. Alhamdulillah, tafsir of Surah Al-Hamd needs to be buckled to the T. Tafsir of Surah Al-Ikhlas buckled to the T. What does the tasbih in the ruku stand for? What does the tasbih in sajda, and so on and so forth? Everything that you utter in your salat, you must know what it represents. How is it that I recite salat for 20, 30, 40, 50 years of my life, and I didn't even understand the meaning of what I am uttering in salat? Therefore, ahibba'i, we have responsibilities ahead of us, and one of them from the Quran. Importance of Surah Al-Ikhlas. They asked, coming back to our riwayah, they come back and they asked, what is the meaning of the word as-samad? فقال تفسيره في الصمد 5 أحرف. The tafsir of the word as-samad in Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad. The tafsir of the word as-samad is captured within the 5 letters. Allahu samad in Surah Al-Ikhlas. As-samad is made up of 5 letters. Yahuwa, alif, lam, sad, mim, and dal. 5 letters. You find over here, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says, each one of these 5 letters represent a certain aspect of Tawheed and a certain aspect from the characters of Allah Azza wa Jal. He begins with the alif. What does the alif in the word as-samad stand for? فَالْأَلِفْ دَلِيلٌ عَلَىٰ إِنِّيَّتِهِ وهو قوله عز وجل شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو وذلك تنبيه وإشارة إلى الغائب عن درك الحواس. He says the alif represents in the word as-samad, the word or the letter afwan, the letter alif represents the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or represents the unity in the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dalilun ala inniyatih. In niyyah, there is a great kalam in understanding in niyyah, which may be out of the scope for today's majlis. But if Allah Azza wa Jal, through the grace of Ahlul Bayt, give us an opportunity to have tafsir on this, inshallah, we can have a bahath mufassal, an in-depth understanding of this concept of in-niyyah. وَهُوَ قَوْلُهُ, and the Imam goes on to say, this is Allah attesting for himself his own unity. Yani, Allah Azza wa Jal in his grandeur attests to his own unity. Allah shahidallahu annahu la ilaha illahu. Allah himself bears witness that there is no God except him. Unity within the essence of Allah Azza wa Jal. And even using the word the essence of Allah, there is a lot of ihtiyat lest a person falls into shirk because of unwarranted philosophical connotations that can enter into this. Wa alay kulli halin, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alif. Wallam dalilun ala ilahiyyatih bi'annahu huwa Allah. The letter lam within the word as-samad reflects or is a representation of the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dalilun ala ilahiyyatih. So within the alif lam of as-samad, there are 2 vital aspects of our deen that are represented within these letters. Alif, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the essential oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the lam, the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Imam goes on to say, wal alif wal lam mudghaman la yadharani ala al-lisan wa la yaqa'an fi as-sam' wa yadharan fi al-kitaba dalilan ala anna ilahiyyatah بلطفه خافية لا تدرك بالحواس ولا تقع في لسان واصف ولا أذن شامئ لأن تفسير الإله هو الذي إله الخلق عن درك ماهية وكيفيته بحس أو بوهم لا بل هو مبدأ الأوهام وخالق الحواس وإنما يظهر ذلك عند الكتابة دليل على أن الله سبحانه أظهر ربوبيته في إبداع الخلق وتركيب أرواحهم اللطيفة في أجسادهم الكثيفة, until the end of the hadith, where the Imam says, to give you a little bit of context, the Imam says, وَالْأَلِفْ وَاللَّامْ مُدْغَمَانِ. The alif lam is silent in the pronunciation of the word as-samad. Look, in Arabic, أحبائي شوفوا, in Arabic language, the alphabets are broken up into two categories. And you learn this within the basics of Arabic language. Arabic letters are categorized into two categories. You have those letters that are known as Shamsiyya, and you have those letters within the alphabet that are known as Qamariyya, yani the sun letters and the moon letters. And all the letters within the Arabic alphabet are categorized into two: Shamsiyya, sun letters; Qamariyya, moon letters. Letters that are Qamariyya, these are letters within the Arabic alphabet. If they are connected to alif lam before them, then the alif lam is pronounced. For example, the word qamar, qamar, which means moon. If you add alif lam to qamar, how would you pronounce it? You would say al-qamar. Another letter, mim. If you add alif lam to the letter mim, how do you pronounce it? Al-mujtahid. So, for example, al-qamar, al-mujtahid. On the other hand, you have letters that are known as Shamsiyya, which means that if you connect an alif lam before that letter, the letter lam becomes silent. You don't pronounce it. So, for example, the letter Shams, which is sun, the letter Shams, if you were to, or the word Shams, if you were to attach the letters alif lam to the word Shams, you would not say al-shams, you would say ash-shams, as opposed to al-qamar. So letters that are Shamsiyya within the Arabic alphabet, if they are attached to an alif lam, the lam becomes silent. Ash-shams, for example. The letter lam in the word as-samad is also silent. You don't say al-samad, you say as-samad. The fact that the letter lam is silent, if somebody was to say to you as-samad, you would not, when you hear the word as-samad, you do not necessarily know that the lam exists because it is not pronounced. The only time you would discover the lam is when you would read the word as-samad, and you would recognize the existence of the letter lam without it being pronounced. The silent letter, which despite the fact that it is not pronounced, it still exists. And this is an indication towards the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a representation to the existence of Allah, in the sense that even though you cannot see Allah, you cannot hear Allah, you cannot comprehend Allah Azza wa Jal through your senses, but that does not negate his existence. Just like in the letter lam in as-samad, even though you do not pronounce the lam, it doesn't mean it does not exist. Hence, an indication, the lam, which is in which there is idgham, is a reflection of the existence of Allah, that even though it is not comprehended by the senses, does not mean it does not exist. Rather, it exists, and comprehending this reality is perhaps greater than what the human mind can fathom. But it requires establishing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, requires contemplation. Contemplation within the creation makes what is unknown, quote unquote, become the known, quote unquote. What do you think that did not exist, you find that it's a grand reality in the letter lam. For you can imagine the next time you recite Surah Al-Ikhlas and you say Allahu Samad, how fast does it take split second for us to whiz through this verse. But if a person is to recite this with ma'rifah, even reciting this part of the word Allahu Samad and these meanings of what the Alif Lam represents in regards to the real Tawheed, it takes your soul to a different level in your salah. For Alif, towards the essential oneness of Allah. Lam reflects the lordship of Allah. The fact that Alif Lam in the word As-Samad, Lam is silent, the way that Allah cannot be comprehended by the senses does not mean it negates his existence. And then it goes on to say, Amma Sad. What does the letter Sad mean within the word As-Samad? The Imam goes on to say, فَدَلِيلٌ عَلَىٰ أَنَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ صَادِقٌ. The Sad in the word As-Samad represents the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Sadiq. Sadiq yani truthful. وَقَوْلُهُ صِدْق. And the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are words of truth. وَدَعَى عِبَادَهُ إِلَىٰ اتِّبَاعِ الصِّدْقِ بِالصِّدْقِ. And Allah ordained upon his creation, his servants, to follow the truth through the truth. There is great kalam here. To follow the truth through the truth. وَوَعَدَ بِالصِّدْقِ. And the Lord has made promises about the truth, Darus Sidq. And he has promised us and warned us about the existence of truth, yani the world of truth, in the sense that kalam on Jannah and Jahannam is truth. Belief in the hereafter, the rewards of Jannah, this is truth. But at the same time, belief in the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also truth. Sometimes you find person negates the punishments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jahannam. He says, Allah is too merciful, we can't do this. So they continue to sin and to live their life the way they want. We should never despair the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without doubt, and to make anybody despair from the mercy of Allah in itself is a sin. But this does not mean that we discount the justice of Allah through his punishment, because this in itself becomes a faculty through which we correct our own behavior. Believing in the punishment of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and the fact that we will be accountable in front of this grand creator of everything within existence, brings the ego of a man down. Because in this dunya, you find a tyrant many times becomes a tyrant. Why? Why a person has the jur'ah to do dhulm and to speak to other people in the way they want and oppress them and their rights and so on and so forth, whether it is in political scenario or economic scenario or anything else. Why? Because they are not accountable to anybody in the dunya. But remembering you are accountable to the Lord in the akhirah creates within you this sense of accountability, and it becomes a function through which you correct your behavior and lower your ego. For the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are sidq. وَوَعَدَ بِالصِّدْقِ. Allah has promised the truth. The return of the Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Is truth. This government of global justice and peace and tranquility in a world that is marked with atheism, in a world that is marked with injustice and oppression. For the Muwali and the lover of Ahlul Bayt, who has been mocked and shunned from society and oppressed for his belief, he doesn't lose hope and doesn't become weak because he believes that the return of the Mahdi is sidq, is truth promised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As-Samad, Alif Lam Sad. Number 4, Mim. What does the letter Mim in As-Samad signify? Wa ammal Mim, the Imam goes on to say, فَدَلِيلٌ عَلَى مُلْكِهِ وَأَنَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ. Mim, yani the mulk of Allah, the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This universe and everything in the universe and everything beyond, the true ownership of this belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kingdom is of Allah azza wa jal. And anything that you and I have from within the riches of this dunya and what it has to offer, this is nothing but alone. These are deep words, but alone granted to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will judge us based on how we dealt with this loan. Mulk, this kingdom is of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mim, and the words are a lot. This ba'ad is just an index explanation. Wa amma dal, the last letter in the word as-samad, the letter dal, فَدَلِيلٌ عَلَى دَوَامِ مُلْكِهِ وَأَنَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلْ دَائِمٌ تَعَالَى عَنِ الْكَوْنِ وَالزَّوَالِ. The dal over here represents dawama mulkih. Dawama mulkih, yani the eternity of the kingship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Eternity of the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that eternity, in everything within the realm of existence, this eternity belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَنَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ دَائِمٌ وَأَنَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ دَائِمٌ تَعَالَى عَنِ الْكَوْنِ وَالزَّوَالِ. Not only is the kingdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eternal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, the kingdom is one, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of everything within existence, is eternal and not constrained to time or space. Rather, He is the creator of time and space. Look at what the Imam says. ثم قال, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, لو وجدت لعلمي الذي آتاني الله عز وجل حملة لنشرت التوحيد والإسلام والإيمان والدين والشرائع من الصمد. He says, I wish, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says, I wish that I could find one suitable person to whom I could convey the knowledge that has been granted to me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I could find one person who was deserving to accept this knowledge, I would have spread. La nashartu, nashara, yani to spread across the earth. I would have spread Tawheed and Islam and Iman and Deen and the fiqh, Sharia, just from the word As-Samad. Allahu Akbar. This word that we recite so carelessly inside of Salat, so fast inside of Salat, maybe never even, and I ask myself, maybe never even questioned what this word As-Samad means. The Imam says, Tawheed, Islam, Iman, Deen, and Sharia, 5 aspects of our religion. I will be able to establish just from the word as-samad, which is made of 5 letters. The Imam can do this with 5 letters of the Holy Quran. Allahu Akbar, in the knowledge of the Imam of this entire Quran. And even after this, the Imam is saying, this is another aspect of the times in which Imam al-Baqir lived. If I could find one person who was deserving of this ilm, yani shuno, there was no one. Look at what the Imam says. وَكَيْفَ لِي بِذَلِكَ? He says, and how can I expect to find people with whom I can entrust my knowledge? وَلَمْ يَجِدْ جَدِّ أَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ حَمَلَةً لِإِلْمِهِ. How can I expect to find somebody when my grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen couldn't find anyone? حَتَّى كَانَ يَتَنَفَّسَ السُّعْدَى, until he used to take deep breaths and he used to sigh from the mimbar, Salluni qabla an tafkiduni. The Imam goes on. The rest. Ahibbai, tafsir of the word as-samad and tafsir of the Quran. You find that these are indications and indicators of the tafsir and the knowledge which the Imam spread in regards to the tafsir of the Quran, and through tafsir of the Quran, the true understanding of Tawheed, and Kalam Kabir in regards to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. One of the other functions from from one of the functions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was establishing the aza of Ahlul Bayt as mainstream practice within the days of Hajj. Ikhwani, for those of you, few days back, when we were blessed to perform the majlis, the istishhad of Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, we spoke about how Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam placed the core beliefs of tashayyu within mainstream Islamic practice. And you find that this is a common theme within the functions of imamat for every imam. And you find that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was at the forefront of this. And this part of the majlis, ahibba, is by way of ishara. Look at the wasiyah of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. The final testament of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam and part of his final will. And this part of the narration is narrated in Furu' al-Kafi, and it is also narrated in Tahdhib, Kitab al-Tahdhib. Furu' al-Kafi and Tahdhib, fundamental books of fiqh and fundamental books within ijtihad, such that a mujtahid cannot be a mujtahid unless he has mastered hadith from within Furu' al-Kafi and Tahdhib. Hadith al-Sharif on authority of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, an Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, qala li abi. He says, my father said to me on his deathbed, Ya Ja'far, yani the testimony of Imam al-Baqir upon his deathbed, Ya Ja'far, awqif li min mali kada wa kada, an-nawadib tandubni 10 sinin bi Mina ayyam Mina. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam gives a final testimony to his son Imam al-Sadiq in his will, and he says to him, O my son Ja'far, put aside for me, or put aside from my money that I'm leaving you, from the inheritance that I'm leaving you, leave aside for me, or a portion, a part of my inheritance, which will then be used to commemorate mourning ceremonies for me, eulogies for me, in the way that I am martyred for a span of 10 years during the days of Mina. Allahu Akbar. The Imam is commanding his son, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, to appoint and to set aside funds such that eulogies are recited and the ma'atam is performed to ensure or to revive the manner in which he was martyred during the days of Mina. Awalan, when are the days of Mina? The days of Mina are a part of the days of Hajj. And you will find that the Hujjaj spend the day of Eid in the land of Mina. Yani, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam has commanded his son Imam al-Sadiq, make sure, set aside funds to ensure that my azadari is performed on the day of Eid in the land of Mina amongst the Hujjaj. Allahu Akbar. Ya laha min ma'ani. How great are the deep meanings and the implications of the words of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Majlis Aza, to eulogize, to weep and to mourn the tragedy of Ahlul Bayt in general and the tragedy of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam in particular on the day of Eid. For 10 years, Imam al-Baqir expected that in Hajj, on the day of Eid, people would weep over his martyrdom. And to weep over his martyrdom, by the way, was laying the foundation for people to weep the martyrdom of Sayyid Shahadah Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. And Imam al-Baqir intentionally planned it this way. Azadari of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Eid. Which might come as a surprise for some people. Our understanding of the commemoration or our understanding in the manner in which Eid is celebrated. وصراحة, Eid is a day of celebration. This celebration does not mean that a person should not or cannot weep for Ahlul Bayt. There is an aspect for Eid where there is celebration, but there is an aspect of Eid which is commemoration. And if you ask me, you ask a number of the fuqaha, the aspect of commemoration, yani the weeping and the grief, by far outweighs the function of celebration. By far. And this in itself is a bahath or a discussion or a majlis on its own. By way of ishara, why did Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam select the day of Eid in particular for people to weep for Ahlul Bayt, Hayal Eid? And why in particular the land of Mina? Why not Arafah? Why not inside of Mecca? This in itself is a majlis. It requires a number of majalis. And inshallah, for this particular topic, we hope if Allah Azza wa Jal, through the grace of Sayyid al-Shuhada, on the nights of Shahr Muharram, inshallah al-Atiyah, in these coming nights of Shahr Muharram, we will dedicate one night of the majalis to be able to discuss, or for us to be able to get a glimpse of some of the wisdom of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam in the way that he strategized the institution of Hajj with the institution of Azadari, and to understand glimpses of why Imam al-Baqir chose and selected the land of Mina to be the land of Azadari for years to come until the dhuhur of the Imam. Inshallah, this we will go into detail in in-depth understanding to the extent that is possible in one of the lectures for Shahr Muharram this year. Inshallah, with the grace of Sayyid al-Shuhada. It's al-Kafi, ihna at the doorstep of Eid. For us to take heed and to follow within the footsteps of Ahlul Bayt. Ahibai, historians have marked the fact that even though Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam kept distance from the oppressive government of the time, and kept distance from any sort of association with them, and never showed any interest in obtaining a part of this dunya for which this oppressive government shed millions and millions of innocent lives' blood. They still saw Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam as a threat for what he represented and the knowledge that he carried. And the history has it that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was administered with poison on the authority of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik al-La'in. And the manner in which the poison was administered to the Imam, Sarahatan, Ahibba'i, when you look at some of the mannerisms in which poison was administered and the impact this poison had on Ahlul Bayt when they were poisoned, you would find that within the science of poisonology, you would see that perhaps the intensity of the poisons used at that time against Ahlul Bayt, mankind has not seen anything nor before this nor after this. I look at this type of a poison that was administered to Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. What type of substance was given to him such that his insides began to disintegrate to an extent that he would vomit out pieces of his inside while coughing? What type of poison is this? And what has it done to the insides of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba? Well, look at the riwayah that talks about the poison that was granted to Maulana Imam al-Jawad Ruhi lahul Fidah. The Rawi says, the one who made the poison and inserted it into the fruit or the grape that was given to Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, he says, I was so careful in the way that I put the poison into the grapes, how I administered the poison into the grapes, knowing that if a single drop of this poison was to fall on this piece of earth, the piece of earth or soil on which this poison falls, that land would become barren and infertile. Vegetation would cease to grow. For what did it do to the insides of Imam al-Jawad? You look at the poison that was on the sword of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam when Ibn Muljim al-La'in struck Amir al-Mu'mineen. Not only did he strike him with the sword, but the sword was poisoned. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya says that on the 20th night, when I sat by my father, there was a white bandage that was used that was tied around the head of my father. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya says the impact of the poison was such that we didn't know what is more pale, the complexion of my father's face or the whiteness of the bandage used to wrap around his head. And in the same way, the poison that was administered to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, historians, when you read through the books of Tariq in history, you will find that the historians are not on clear consensus or agreement of the manner in which Imam al-Baqir was poisoned. Do you know what this signifies? It signifies the extent to which Bani Umayyah plotted and planned to secretly poison Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, such that those details were not even known, perhaps only to the closest of the close. And they poisoned him in secrecy, such that if no one was to know about the poison, his death would be discounted as a natural death. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserves the truth. And truth is there to be manifest. The riwayah mentions that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was poisoned through a saddle. This saddle that was used to place on the back of the horse for Imam al-Sadiq for Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam to ride upon, the saddle in itself was covered with an entire layer of this poison, such that when Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam sat on the straddle, the poison then penetrated the skin cells and began to affect him in this way. Sarahatan, within the science of poisonology, such poisons to be administered, as I said before, perhaps the nations before and the nations after till today have not seen this sort of warfare. In any case, the narrations mention that the poison was administered to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam through the saddle which was granted to him to ride his horse upon. As soon as Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam sat upon the saddle, he felt the impact of the poison in his legs. And the first impact of the poison was such that the Imam's legs began to swell over time. They became swollen to an extent that the Imam was barely able to move his body. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam says the impact of the poison was such that 3 days later my father left the dunya. For 3 days and nights Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam suffered the pangs of the poison, suffered from the difficulties and the intensity. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Imam as-Sadiq says there came a point towards his final day when the impact of the poison was such that my father began to sweat continuously and sweat profusely. The impact of the poison was as if that the body of my father was on fire from the insides. Imam as-Sadiq sat by the side of his father Imam al-Baqir, feeding him with water to quench his thirst and wiping the sweat off his forehead. Only Allah knows, because of the intensity of the poison of Imam al-Baqir, even drank any of the water. The narrations mention Imam al-Baqir then began to give the final wasiyah to his son Imam al-Sadiq. He says to him, "O my son Ja'far, if I am to die, I want you to give me the ghusl and to give me the kafan, because only one Imam can give ghusl and a kafan to another Imam. And when I die, I want you to bury me in the graveyard of Jannatul Baqir by my father Zain al-Abidin, because the sand and the earth of Jannatul Baqi is blessed with the graves of my father and my grandfathers, yani my uncle Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam." Imam al-Baqir then goes on to command Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam to apportion a part of inheritance for his eulogy to be recited in the lands of Mina during the days of Eid for a period of 10 years. Allah, Allah, ya Shia. And then Imam al-Baqir says to him, "O my son Ja'far, as I take the final breaths of my life, I want you to remove my body. I want you to remove me from my bedding. And I want you to lay me down on the sand in the house. Let me die while my body, I am lying down on the sands." Ajib. Allah. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam began to weep and he says, "Oh father, why do you want me to remove you from your bedding and to put you on the sand? Why do you want to die while your body is on the sand?" His father Imam al-Baqir looked at him and said, "Oh my son Ja'far, I want to die and to take my final breath in this dunya while I am lying on the sand, In this way, I want to replicate the manner in which my grandfather Abu Abdullah al-Hussein left the dunya." My grandfather Hussein, my grandfather Hussein on his final moments. His breath was taken away while his body was on the sands of Karbala. Ya Imam, Ya Imam al-Baqir, in what way, in which state was Aba Abdullah? With wounds on his body, blood flowing from his forehead, blood flowing from his cheeks and his chest and his bones. The body of Imam al-Hussein covered with the blood of Abu al-Fadil, covered with the blood from the jugular veins of Ali al-Asghar. This was the Sayyid al-Shuhada in his final moments. Ya Imam al-Baqir, in your final moments, you were blessed to have your son Ja'far as-Sadiq by your side, comforting you and weeping you. But Aba Abdullah al-Hussein in Karbala, in his final moments, there were the marauding horsemen kicking him on his body as he watched from the corner of his eye towards the Khaybar. Imam al-Hussein saw his sister Zainab cry out, Wa akha wa Hussein. At that moment, Imam al-Hussein says, Oh Zainab, go back into the tent, lest the enemies begin to mock you or to attack you while I am alive. Oh, Imam al-Baqir, how fortunate are you that your son as-Sadiq is by your side. The narrations mention that Imam al-Sadiq lay Imam al-Baqir on the earth, on the sands, and he made him to face the Qibla. Imam al-Baqir in his final moments designated Imam al-Sadiq as the final Imam. He gave him the Dhul Fiqar, he gave him the Aqiq, he gave him the Mus'haf Fatima, he gave him the Quran, the Jami' authored by Amir al-Mu'mineen. The Imam then lay down facing the Qibla. He straightened his arms and his legs. Imam al-Baqir was reciting the Quran while taking his final breaths. At a point, Imam al-Sadiq says the recitation of the Quran became fainter and fainter until the recitation stopped altogether. I looked at my father. The sweat of death began to drip his forehead. He took a final breath and the recitation of the Quran stopped. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Imam al-Baqir's ruh left his body towards the heavens. Rahimallahu man nada wa imama wa Baqira wa Sayyida. Imam al-Sadiq very tearfully gave a ghusl and the coffin to his father Imam al-Baqir. The janaza of Imam al-Baqir was taken to Jannatul Baqi, and Imam al-Sadiq tearfully laid his father in the qabr, and he began to cover the grave with the sand of Jannatul Baqi, sitting on the side and weeping. Oh, Imam al-Sadiq, how great is your trial and how great is your tribulation. But as you sit at the grave of your father, Imam al-Baqir, I remember Karbala, Karbala, Karbala. When Sukaina threw herself on the body of her father, Aba Abdullah, in Medina over here, no one whipped Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam to take him back from the grave or from the body of Imam al-Baqir. Ya Imam al-Sadiq. But in Karbala, on the 11th of Muharram, when Sayyidah Sukaina saw the headless body of Aba Abdullah trampled by the horses, she threw herself on the janazah of her father. She would not leave her father, so Shimar al-La'in said the only way to separate her from her father is to whip her and whip her until she moves away. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And the whips of Sayyidah Sukaina will continue to bear wounds on the hearts of the Shias until the day of judgment and beyond. اللهم إنا نسألك بحق مولانا إمام محمد الباقر اللهم عجل لولينا الفرج. We pray to Allah Azza wa Jal by the sake of Imam al-Baqir to hasten the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam to forgive us our sins on a night like this. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam to inspire us to seek knowledge in this deen, to take more initiative to recite the Quran, to understand the Quran. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Ya Allah, grant us the tawfiq to uphold the azadari of Ahlul Bayt wa khasatan, and in particular in these coming days of Shahr al-Muharram with all the challenges that exist. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, marhumin and marhumat who have passed away, make their graves into a garden from the gardens of Jannah. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, mu'minin and mu'minat who have hajat, do not let any one of them leave this farsh aza except that you fulfill their hajat. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, grant us the opportunity to perform his ziyarah in Jannatul Baqir. Grant us the opportunity to perform the ziyarah of his grandfathers in the land of Iraq. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam al-Baqir, grant us the blessing of their intercession on the day of judgment. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, mu'minin and mu'minat who are not in the best of health, you grant them shafa'ah. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. يقول الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج أحبائه. For the ending of the majlis and the recitation of before the Nawha and the Matam, that inshallah each of you will be performing. If we can take this time to recite one Surah Al-Fatiha on behalf of all our marhumin and marhumat, and in particular on behalf of Al-Hajj Marhum Mustafa Dosha, who passed away very recently in Nairobi, mu'min from the mu'mineen of Nairobi Jamaat. If we can take this moment to recite for him and for all our mu'mineen and mu'minat one Surah Al-Fatiha. Rahimallahu man kara'a Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.